Geothermal energy, it's the Earth's natural heat. Engineers drill deep wells like this one to reach the hot water underground.
Standing here at Sydagma Square in the heart of the Greek capital, the thermometer shows temperatures close to 40 degrees Celsius, making it difficult to even stand somewhere in the shade. Top that with Saharan dust from Africa, and you have conditions that it's making it even difficult to breathe, especially for those with existing health conditions.
Experts predict that the hydrogen market could be worth as much as $2.5 trillion a year by 2050. And Spain wants to be a key player, particularly in green hydrogen and the fuels that are going to power more sustainable shipping.
Something is happening in the quiet countryside of Britain. It's a movement that could turbocharge biodiversity and reduce flooding. It's time to rethink how rivers look and put back their wiggles and curves.
Just an hour or two ago, we were standing in this exact spot and it was pretty much entirely shaded, pretty dark and covered. And now, with the work of the volunteers underway, it's totally opened up.
We need more renewable energy. Wind power becomes more efficient the taller, the larger you make the turbines. So we need a better way to build huge towers.
So why choose wood over traditional materials like steel or concrete?
It's carbon dioxide, of course. And then it's also very strong by weight than steel. So that makes the transportation is easier because we are building wind power plants in all over the world right now.
You know, freshwater habitats are declining more than any other habitat. The species are in free fall. And this is a quick way of bringing back a really biodiverse freshwater hotspot.
As climate change occurs, we might have warmer summers, we might have more drought conditions as we've had before, and that might mean that this water is lost.
We are very much engaged in this kind of new approach to a sustainable economy.
50 years ago, the world was witnessing monumental events. Amid shifting global dynamics, China and the European community took a defining step, forging a new bond that has shaped history. From the ancient Silk Road to Marco Polo's epic journeys, China and Europe have always bridged continents. Building on 50 years of understanding, we're now charting a future full of shared possibilities and innovation. Bridges of time, 50 years of partnership, and the journey continues.
some reason I just let me dial in again. Yeah, let me try it again. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay, let me switch it to the maximum volume. I think I can more or less, yeah. Still not that clear, but I can hear you. Oh, okay. Test, test, test. Good. Like this. Turn a bit more. Like this, okay. Yeah, I can hear the test voice very, very clear, and I can hear your voice. Yeah, a bit low, but I can hear you now better. Yeah, a moment ago, I can hear all the repeat of my own voice when I was put together with the other guest.
I'm in, or shall I stay here? I'm well out of range, I'm assuming. Okay, fine. Yeah, Marjun, it's Jamie, the host in London. I'm just checking you can hear me and you're happy. In Brussels, I should say. What am I talking about?
Hi, Jimmy. I can hear you a bit low, I have to say. Let me turn. Let me raise my. Yeah, Jamie, you can hear me, and can you say something?
Marjun, it's Jamie, the host in Brussels, just checking you can hear me, and we're happy with the quality of your line.
Okay, good. Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Marjun, it's
No, but I'm not sure whether if the other guests are online, whether I will hit that. Okay.
Hi, hello, hi, Jimmy.
Good.
Hello.
yeah, I've got you, absolutely, yep. Wu Changhua, it's Jamie, the host in Brussels. I just want to check you can hear me and you're happy with the quality of the line, both coming out from you and going into you.
Yes, Jimmy, but somehow you're cut off a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to keep talking to you while we fiddle with what we used to call the horizontal hold in 1970s television, which the old people in the gallery will understand. You're far too young, of course, to understand what I'm talking about. But anyway, I'm going to keep talking to you, and maybe you'll be happy with it this time.
Sure. Yeah, there's no echoing anymore, so that's good.
Marvellous. It's good to hear you, and I'm going to get out of the way now and thank you and put you on standby, ready for our start in 10 minutes or so.
Sure, thank you. Not yet.
No, not quite.
I cannot hear Marjun yet.
Changhua, can you hear me?
A kind of new approach to a sustainable economy.
50 years ago, the world was witnessing monumental events. Amid shifting global dynamics, China and the European community took a defining step, forging a new bond that has shaped history. From the ancient Silk Road to Marco Polo's epic journeys, China and Europe have always bridged continents. Building on 50 years of understanding, we're now charting a future full of shared possibilities and innovation. Bridges of time, 50 years of partnership, and the journey continues.
Geothermal energy, it's the Earth's natural heat. Engineers drill deep wells like this one to reach the hot water underground.
Standing here at Syntagma Square in the heart of the Greek capital, the thermometer shows temperatures close to 40 degrees Celsius, making it difficult to even stand somewhere in the shade. Top that with Saharan dust from Africa, and you have conditions that it's making it even difficult to breathe, especially for those with existing health conditions.
Experts predict that the hydrogen market could be worth as much as $2.5 trillion a year by 2050. And Spain wants to be a key player, particularly in green hydrogen and the fuels that are going to power more sustainable shipping.
Something is happening in the quiet countryside of Britain. It's a movement that could turbocharge biodiversity and reduce flooding. It's time to rethink how rivers look and put back their wiggles and curves.
Just an hour or two ago, we were standing in this exact spot and it was pretty much entirely shaded, pretty dark and covered. And now, with the work of the volunteers underway, it's totally opened up.
We need more renewable energy. Wind power becomes more efficient the taller, the larger you make the turbines. So we need a better way to build huge towers.
So why choose wood over traditional materials like steel or concrete?
It's carbon dioxide, of course. And then it's also very strong by weight than steel. So that makes the transportation is easier because we're building wind power plants in all over the world right now.
You know, freshwater habitats are declining more than any other habitat. The species are in free fall, and this is a quick way of bringing back a really biodiverse freshwater hotspot.
As climate change occurs, we might have warmer summers, we might have more drought conditions as we've had before, and that might mean that this water is lost.
We are very much engaged in this kind of new approach to a sustainable economy.
50 years ago, the world was witnessing monumental events. Amid shifting global dynamics, China and the European community took a defining step, forging a new bond that has shaped history. From the ancient Silk Road to Marco Polo's epic journeys, China and Europe have always bridged continents. Building on 50 years of understanding, we're now charting a future full of shared possibilities and innovation. Bridges of time, 50 years of partnership, and the journey continues.
Geothermal energy, it's the Earth's natural heat. Engineers drill deep wells like this one to reach the hot water underground.
Standing here at Syntagma Square in the heart of the Greek capital, the thermometer shows temperatures close to 40 degrees Celsius, making it difficult to even stand somewhere in the shade. Top that with Saharan dust from Africa, and you have conditions that it's making it even difficult to breathe, especially for those with existing health conditions.
Experts predict that the hydrogen market could be worth as much as $2.5 trillion a year by 2050. And Spain wants to be a key player, particularly in green hydrogen and the fuels that are going to power more sustainable shipping.
Something is happening in the quiet countryside of Britain. It's a movement that could turbocharge biodiversity and reduce flooding. It's time to rethink how rivers look and put back their wiggles and curves.
Just an hour or two ago, we were standing in this exact spot and it was pretty much entirely shaded, pretty dark and covered. And now, with the work of the volunteers underway, it's totally opened up.
We need more renewable energy. Wind power becomes more efficient the taller, the larger you make the turbines. So we need a better way to build huge towers.
So why choose wood over traditional materials like steel or concrete?
It's carbon dioxide, of course. And then it's also very strong by weight than steel. So that makes the transportation is easier because we are building wind power plants in all over the world right now.
You know, freshwater habitats are declining more than any other habitat. The species are in free fall, and this is a quick way of bringing back a really biodiverse freshwater hotspot.
As climate change occurs, we might have warmer summers, we might have more drought conditions as we've had before, and that might mean that this water is lost.
We are very much engaged in this kind of new approach to a sustainable economy.
50 years ago, the world was witnessing monumental events. Amid shifting global dynamics, China and the European community took a defining step, forging a new bond that has shaped history. From the ancient Silk Road to Marco Polo's epic journeys, China and Europe have always bridged continents. Building on 50 years of understanding, we're now charting a future full of shared possibilities and innovation. Bridges of time, 50 years of partnership, and the journey continues.
Geothermal energy, it's the Earth's natural heat. Engineers drill deep wells like this one to reach the hot water underground.
Standing here at Syntagma Square in the heart of the Greek capital, the thermometer shows temperatures close to 40 degrees Celsius, making it difficult to even stand somewhere in the shade. Top that with Saharan dust from Africa, and you have conditions that it's making it even difficult to breathe, especially for those with existing health conditions.
Experts predict that the hydrogen market could be worth as much as $2.5 trillion a year by 2050. And Spain wants to be a key player, particularly in green hydrogen and the fuels that are going to power more sustainable shipping.
Something is happening in the quiet countryside of Britain. It's a movement that could turbocharge biodiversity and reduce flooding. It's time to rethink how rivers look and put back their wiggles and curves.
Just an hour or two ago, we were standing in this exact spot and it was pretty much entirely shaded, pretty dark and covered. And now, with the work of the volunteers underway, it's totally opened up.
We need more renewable energy. Wind power becomes more efficient the taller, the larger you make the turbines. So we need a better way to build huge towers.
So why choose wood over traditional materials like steel or concrete?
It's carbon dioxide, of course. And then it's also very strong by weight than steel. So that makes the transportation is easier because we are building wind power plants in all over the world right now.
You know, freshwater habitats are declining more than any other habitat. The species are in free fall, and this is a quick way of bringing back a really biodiverse freshwater hotspot.
As climate change occurs, we might have warmer summers, we might have more drought conditions as we've had before, and that might mean that this water is lost.
We are very much engaged in this kind of new approach to a sustainable economy.
50 years ago, the world was witnessing monumental events. Amid shifting global dynamics, China and the European community took a defining step, forging a new bond that has shaped history. From the ancient Silk Road to Marco Polo's epic journeys, China and Europe have always bridged continents. Building on 50 years of understanding, we're now charting a future full of shared possibilities and innovation. Bridges of time, 50 years of partnership, and the journey continues.
Geothermal energy, it's the Earth's natural heat. Engineers drill deep wells like this one to reach the hot water underground.
Standing here at Syntagma Square in the heart of the Greek capital, the thermometer shows temperatures close to 40 degrees Celsius, making it difficult to even stand somewhere in the shade. Top that with Saharan dust from Africa, and you have conditions that it's making it even difficult to breathe, especially for those with existing health conditions.
Experts predict that the hydrogen market could be worth as much as $2.5 trillion a year by 2050. And Spain wants to be a key player, particularly in green hydrogen and the fuels that are going to power more sustainable shipping.
Something is happening in the quiet countryside of Britain. It's a movement that could turbocharge biodiversity and reduce flooding. It's time to rethink.
Just an hour or two ago, we were standing in this exact spot, and it was pretty much entirely shaded, pretty dark and covered. And now, with the work of the volunteers underway, it's totally opened up.
We need more renewable energy. Wind power becomes more efficient the taller, the larger you make the turbines. So we need a better way.
Minister, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the Residence Palace here in the heart of Brussels, the European Quarter, for this very special event towards a green future. I'm Jamie Owen, the television news anchor at CGTN Europe, and it's my very great pleasure to be your host here today. And welcome also if you're live streaming this event on our YouTube and Facebook pages. Very good to have your company. Now, if you were sitting in economy in the back, you're very welcome to come forward a little bit. We have some seats in business class and just one or two in first class if you're particularly well behaved. Ladies and gentlemen, Confucius always seems to have the right thought for the right time. He wrote, "Let the states of equilibrium and harmony exist in perfection, and a happy order will prevail throughout heaven and earth, and all things will be nourished and flourish." Well, wise words, and perhaps words that match today's event as we mark 50 years of diplomatic relations between China and the EU, and hope to nourish our minds with the release of this exclusive report prepared by CGTN Europe, the Institute of Europe Environmental Policy, and the Institute of Carbon Neutrality at Peking University, powering the twin engines navigating China-EU climate cooperation. Before we get to that, I'd like to invite to the stage our first distinguished keynote speaker, Minister Zhu Jing from China's mission to the European Union. A very warm welcome. Good to see you.
Dear Mr. Tusk, chère Caroline, chère Madame Vance, and chère Axel, and my dear friends and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the diplomatic ties between China and the European Union, it is my great pleasure to be entrusted by Mr. Tsai Run, the ambassador of the People's Republic of China to the European Union, to attend the Towards a Green Future Forum. On behalf of the Ambassador Tsai Run, I would like to wish today's event a full success. Over the past 50 years, China-EU relations have come a long way. One important experience and lesson we have learned is that we must uphold the principle of multilateralism and maintain partnership. At present, challenges such as climate change, environmental pollution, and biodiversity loss are intertwined, posing an existential threat to human society and the planet Earth we all share. However, certain countries are pursuing unilateralism, placing their own interest above the common good of all humanity and undermining international solidarity. Green is the color of China-EU cooperation. Advancing and deepening our green partnership is not only vital for the well-being of our two peoples, but also carries the hopes of global sustainable development. Looking back, China and the EU have become global champions of climate governance. We are committed to green transformation. We work together to promoting the adoption and implementation of the Paris Agreement, injecting strong momentum into global low-carbon transition. In recent years, President Xi Jinping and the EU leaders have held multiple meetings, during which they reached a number of consensus on strengthening cooperation on green transition. In June last year, the 5th China-EU high-level dialogue on environment and climate was successfully held in Brussels, producing a series of deliverables. It also demonstrated our strong commitment to continuing dialogue, increasing consensus, and deepening green partnership in the fields of green transformation and climate cooperation. From intergovernmental policy coordination and to pragmatic cooperation among business and research institutions, China and the EU green exchange are becoming increasingly close, and the green cooperation continues to deepen. This injects lasting vitality into collaboration in green development and the other fields, and sets a good example on the global level. China and the EU have no fundamental clash of interest or geopolitical conflict in the process of green transformation. We share extensive common interest and have vast potential for cooperation. We are partners who can help each other succeed. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and the EU. We should take this opportunity to elevate China-EU green cooperation to a higher level. Going forward, we should first continue to enhance multiple trust, deepen policy communication, tap into full potential of cooperation, build broader consensus, and provide stronger political momentum for cooperation. Second, we should consolidate our green partnership, adopt an open and inclusive attitude to build more platforms for green development exchanges, encourage mutual investment in green industries, strengthen collaborative innovation, and better achieve shared development. Third, we should jointly take concrete actions to uphold multilateralism and push for the achievement of practical outcomes at COP30. We should enhance cooperation to attract broader participation in green development from other countries and regions, contributing China-EU wisdom to building a global climate governance system. Ladies and gentlemen, this year marks the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement and the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. Climate change is a common challenge for humanity, and the green development is the prevailing global trend. Let us learn from the past 50 years and move forward with greater determination, a more open mind, and more pragmatic actions to deepen green cooperation and increase the well-being of people of China and Europe, as well as the whole world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Minister, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate your time and your words. Minister Zhu Jing from China's mission to the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to welcome Jan Dusic, the Deputy Director General for Climate Action at the European Commission, to share his thoughts. A very warm welcome and a round of applause for him, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Zhu Jing. Ladies and gentlemen, 50 years ago in May 1975, shortly after I was born, Sir Christopher Soames, at that time the Vice President of the Commission, visited China. During this visit, he and the then Prime Minister Zhou Enlai agreed to establish diplomatic relations. The EU was still the European Economic Community with 9 member states. The EU's economic and political integration would only accelerate over 1.5 decades later. On the other side of the world, China had lived through political and economic challenges, but soon your country would embark on reforms that would lay the foundation for its economic prosperity that we are witnessing today. Geopolitically, in 1975, the world was locked into the Cold War. 3 years before, in 1972, the Club of Rome has published its famous report, Limits to Growth, which discussed the problems of global population growth and resource depletion. Yet, climate change did not feature in it, although it would have strengthened its narrative. In fact, there was no consensus yet about whether the world was potentially facing global warming or global cooling. How much our countries and the world have changed since then. Even 15 years later, in 1990, countries of today's EU27 and the US each accounted for roughly a quarter of global real GDP at purchasing power parities, EU 25% and the US 23%. With its 4% share, China was a developing country. Today, those shares are 14% for the EU, 15% for the US, and 20% for China. It is proud to have become a technologically advanced economy, and rightly so. China has achieved this by itself, but knows that having been invited to join multilateral trading system has hugely benefited its advancement. The positive economic development has not been limited to China. Again, this is good news, as hundreds of millions of people have emerged from poverty. Also, in terms of climate change, times have changed dramatically. In 1990, the EU, US, the UK and Japan together made up 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. China's share was at that time 12%. Today, the share of the former countries has halved to 20%, while China's has reached 30%. By 2030, China's share will be about the same, while the EU's share is expected to reduce to 4% only. Prime Minister Li Qiang characterized EU-China cooperation. Green is the color of our cooperation, he said. The EU very much subscribes to that. And our cooperation should contribute to strengthening the multilateral frameworks more generally. As a union that combines national and supranational characteristics, this is very much in our nature. By this experience, we know that, like the EU's internal stability, also multilateralism doesn't just happen by itself. It needs leadership by the biggest actors. This means that the leaders must go the extra mile, pay the extra cost, which developing countries won't. Nothing good happens unless we make it happen. And so, the EU will deliver its ambitious, nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement before the Conference of Parties in Belém in November. We will do so despite our already advanced progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But we, as many others, need to see that all major emitters contribute their fair share. Therefore, global climate action hinges upon China. Without China taking firm action as well, the multilateral system under the Paris Agreement will not succeed in fulfilling the agreed temperature objectives. Therefore, China's technologically advanced economy, with its current 30% share in global emissions, must not crowd out all the carbon budget that was designed and reserved for developing countries. The world expectations towards China's NDCs are high. Earlier emission reductions are easier than later ones. Therefore, like ours, China's emissions in 2035 should not surpass a straight line between current emissions and reaching climate neutrality, which for us is in 2050 and for China it is in 2060. If the EU and China, both leading in green technologies, set the highest possible NDC ambition, we can jointly inject new energy into the multilateral system for climate action. Each one of us will also need to reach out to other key emitters to strengthen their climate action. I'm thinking of the United States, where a good number of states is committed to pursue a climate agenda, despite the US federal administration withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. I'm also thinking of Russia, which will soon overtake the EU as the world's 4th emitter, and which is using the multilateral climate process exclusively for its own geopolitical ends and does not implement any meaningful climate policy at all. In its war of aggression against Ukraine, Russia is a threat more generally to the multilateral system, a system that both China and the EU should seek to strengthen. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come a long way since 1975. Much of the developments since then give us a reason of hope. EU integration that has strengthened the European peace order. China's economic success has brought prosperity to its people. But the world's environmental challenges have increased. Climate change, pollution of the oceans, and loss of biodiversity require strong multilateral action at a time where global governance seems to weaken. Looking ahead, we need to pool more resources to help these countries who need our support. International climate finance will need to increase. We all need to contribute in line with our capabilities. If I look into DG Clima's agenda, it is full of examples of our cooperation and dialogues that make me confident about the future of EU-China green cooperation. We will continue training trainers under the Chinese emission trading system. We plan to jointly hold a symposium on finance for resilience in China in June. We will welcome a Chinese study visit about combating methane emissions. We will hold a high-level dialogue on environment and climate in mid-July, and a summit between our leaders shortly after. And together with Canada, we will be the co-hosts of the Ministerial of Climate Action shortly before the COP in Belém. We should use all these opportunities to lead by our respective examples, because nothing good happens until we make it happen. Thank you.
Jan Dusick, thank you very much indeed. Jan Dusick, Deputy Director General for Climate Action at the European Commission. And ladies and gentlemen, now our final keynote speaker for this stage of our gathering anyway, a video message from Connie Hedegaard, the former EU Commissioner for Climate Action.
Hello everybody. Following the hottest year ever recorded on planet Earth, the world's number 2 emitter has decided not only to exit the Paris Agreement, but even to roll some of the already established national policies together or to bring them to a halt. This sad fact must not paralyze the rest of us. Climate change does not take a break or go on hold just because some governments choose to. So, on the contrary, now all responsible forces must work even more closely together, realizing that we are mutually interdependent. What I choose to do or don't do will impact you, and the other way around. Your actions or inactions will have an effect on me. China and the EU have been cooperating on climate change for many years. And over the years, the dialogue has been intensified. Has it always been a smooth and easy ride? I think that everyone who has been involved in it could testify, no, not exactly. But as the report powering the twin engines navigating China-EU climate cooperation shows, we have had and we have developed mutual respect. We have inspired each other, for instance, when it comes to regulation. And we have had very concrete and tangible cooperation, for instance, when it came to the establishment of carbon markets. And we have seen the results that carbon prices have been rising in both areas. I noticed that recently at a meeting convened by Brazilian President Lula, President Xi Jinping said that all sectors will be covered in China's 2035 NDC. I think that is a very encouraging signal and pledge that can help EU to dare keep its ambition. And both EU and China must continue to develop and scale new climate-friendly solutions, and thereby hopefully also inspire others to deliver more action, both when it comes to mitigation and the very necessary adaptation. In this complex world, where decision makers, be it in business or in politics or wherever, they are up to here, overloaded with concerns and challenges on security, instability, risk of inflation, risk of trade wars, all these things, then it could be tempting to put climate change on the back burner. But that would be highly irresponsible. And it would be extremely costly, both to our economies, but of course also to citizens, to humans. On the contrary, we need to speed up and we need to scale solutions and create conditions that can enable also vulnerable regions to act. Therefore, we must cooperate and we must insist that global challenges require more international cooperation, not less, not isolationism, and not backsliding. Thus, EU and China have a mutual interest in continuing to work together. And yes, sometimes it's difficult, but without it, the progress the world so badly needs is impossible. So our dialogue and trust is as important as ever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Connie Hedegaard, the former EU Commissioner for Climate Action, speaking there here in Brussels. Ladies and gentlemen, our first panel coming up next, and in a moment we'll be discussing the importance of China and the EU in the global green transition. But first, I just want to take your temperature, if I may, on climate change with a little bit of audience interaction. Don't flinch, don't worry. I won't be putting any of you on the spot. All voting will be anonymous, obviously. Just imagine it's a bit like the semi-final of the Eurovision Song Contest with much less painful music. If you could get your phone out and either scan the QR code you have at the bottom right of your programme or go to slido.com and enter the code CGTN where prompted. There you will see our first question, and our audience in Brussels can also see the first question. What's the biggest challenge to deeper China-EU alignment on climate policy? Is it geopolitical tensions? Is it economic competition? Is it different climate priorities? Or perhaps a lack of trust and transparency? Our first question to the audience here: what's the biggest challenge to deeper China-EU alignment on climate policy? We're watching the answers coming in here. Is it geopolitical tension, economic competition, different climate priorities, or perhaps a lack of trust and transparency? I think we may have most of the answers in here, and as we look at the big screens here in Brussels, the first option, geopolitical tension, sits on 37%. Economic competition is on 34%. That's gone up to that's moving back and forth. That's someone obviously trying to order an Uber, perhaps later on. I'm not sure. Anyway, you get the vague picture, but different climate priorities is much lower at about 15%, and a lack of trust and transparency sits at around 13% or thereabouts. If you can, try and remember those results, because we'll try and refer to them, and I think we may keep them there as we continue our discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now see what our first panel here today make of that result. With me on stage here in Brussels, Genevieve Pons, Director General and Vice President of Europe, Jacques Delors. Joining us virtually, I'm delighted to introduce from Shanghai, Wu Changhua, Chair of the Governing Council of the Asia-Pacific Water Forum and also Chair of the Global Climate Academy, and in Beijing, a very great pleasure to see Ma Jun, Director of the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel, please give them a warm round of applause. Thank you very much. Genevieve, let me start with you, if I might, first of all, as someone who I think was present for what we might call the very birth of China-EU climate relations, although I must say, ladies and gentlemen, you look far too young to me to say that. We've seen what our audience think in this instant poll. Where are the real challenges now to closer integration?
Thank you very much. I think that geopolitical tensions, now geopolitical tensions is no longer in the first position, which I find great, because in my view, there are geopolitical tensions, but I see them more as an opportunity than as a challenge. I think that the two main challenges are economic competition, but also different climate priorities. I would have put it a bit differently, different situation as far as development and climate are concerned. So let's start with economic competition. The EU and China are in competition in certain domains, like electric vehicles, like solar panels, like critical raw materials. And we are, for the time being, not in the EU at our advantage compared to China. China is much advanced in the three domains I have mentioned, and we are in a position of lagging behind. So this creates difficulties and tensions. We know the fact that we have put, the EU has put, it's not tariff, but countervailing duties because of the result of a subsidies investigation. And China has replicated on taxing, putting tariff on cognac, for instance. So there are tensions, economic competition. That's the first point. Second point, we are not in the same position as far as development, level of development, and climate priorities are concerned. The EU has started reducing CO2 emissions a long time ago, several decades ago. I was there when we adopted the target of stabilizing our CO2 emissions at their 1990 level by 2000. We did it. The decision was taken in 1990. Of course, the EU has reduced its emission during the last decade, but China has continued to grow, and the CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions in China have continued to grow. So our positions are not the same, our objectives are not the same. We are trying to be carbon neutral by 2050. Carbon neutrality for China is a target for 2060, and China wishes to cap the emission by 2030. So these are different situations, competition. However, I see geopolitical tensions as the opportunity to take, because the attitude of the US confronted to so big challenges, common challenges for our common planet, should be for the EU and China a very important incentive to be together and to cooperate.
Let's bring in our other panelists. Marjun, I don't know if you can hear that, but I wonder if you can, if you agree with that perspective. Where do you see the potential problems? I think we may have lost the line to Marjun there. We may try and come back to you in just a few moments, but let me move on then to Wu Changhua. If you can hear me, in a world of increased tension, I wonder how important is climate action to individual governments? I mean, are you concerned that climate action is slipping down the political agenda? I think we may have two sound problems, in which case I'm going to turn to you, Genevieve, again. And I'm just going to ask you the first question, in particular about the green agenda slipping down the political priorities, not just in the United States, which you've alluded to already, but across Europe. There's other stuff to worry about. That's the blunt story, isn't there?
Okay. Maybe I am of an optimistic nature, but I believe really that competitiveness and sustainability not only can but must go well together. And I think the narrative in the EU has changed, and combining precisely competitiveness and sustainability, industrial development, and carbon reduction. I believe, because of some experience, some decades of experience, that these two aims are perfectly compatible. We have to be very vigilant. We have to avoid that under, for instance, a narrative of simplification, we cut important obligations. That's something that can happen, and to be frank, has happened recently. But there is no incompatibility, and the narrative that is proposed by the Commission is really to combine industrial policy and fight against climate change under notably the Clean Industrial Deal.
Let me see now if I can return to Wu Changhua. Good to have you back. I wonder if you might agree that some countries like the UK, for example, who might be, it's said, letting their green ambitions dwindle. I mean, how much of a concern is that? Does it matter or not?
They do matter. They matter tremendously at this very moment. Because against the backdrop of intensifying climate crisis, we need to set much faster pace and scaling in order to make sure we deploy all the solutions possible in order to reach the Paris Agreement, the climate goals, below 1.5 degrees Celsius, hopefully before the end of the century. And how do we do that? We do need to make sure governments, private sectors of the market invest in technologies. We need to build up industrial value chains in order to make sure we turn the technologies into product and services, as well as building up the infrastructure to enable a much faster or accelerated transition in order to, phase out fossil fuels, and to make sure we, build, resilience in the same time. And so the current situation globally is definitely not really helpful. And we're already witnessing the much slowdown in terms of pace and scaling because of the geopolitical situation, because of economic rivalry, competition. Like it or not, geopolitical situation, economic competition had always been there. It's nothing new. But at this critical moment, we do need to figure out actually how to overcome those hurdles as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we'll be all failing actually in this current context in terms of fighting climate crisis.
Marjon, let me come to you. Paris Agreement, the Accords, 10 years ago, 2015, which of course President Trump has again withdrawn the United States from. I mean, every other White House policy seems to be walked back on in just a couple of days, it seems to me. But nonetheless, does the US withdrawal matter if China and the EU work together?
Yeah, I do think, Jamie, it matters because the whole multilateral climate governance is based on the Paris Agreement. With more than with 195 countries ratified that to limit global warming. I think this is a demonstration to an unprecedented global solidarity. Having said that, even before the U.S. withdrew, I think the global stocktake already highlighted the gaps between ambition and implementation. But now, with the withdrawal, I think it's creating a profound challenge. This geopolitical, tension, the geopolitical landscape, I think it's increasingly fragmented. It demonstrated it's increasingly fragmented, by competition, nationalism, and resource rivalry. I think this threatens to shift the focus from climate urgency. We are experiencing all this record-breaking global warming and all the other rising frequency of the extreme weather events. But in the meantime, this shift, all this geopolitical tension is, and the withdrawal from the U.S. Is undermining the solidarity, threatens to shift the focus and undermine this multilateral, climate governance and its critical, some of the critical frameworks. And to the developing world, I think they will find it even less hopeful to resolve the equity disputes, when the U.S. pulled out of Paris. So to fulfill all this financial pledge is a key issue to the developing world. So in this situation, I think it is crucial for China and EU to play the anchor role to try to fill out the gap. I think more recently, we have heard from Chinese President Xi Jinping. He made it clear in April that China will announce its 2035 nationally determined contributions covering all economic sectors and all greenhouse gases before the COP30 in Belém, Brazil. I think this boosts the global confidence and paved the way for a strengthening of the hopefully Sino-EU collaboration.
Wu Jianhua, I wonder what you make of that. I mean, how much do global geopolitical differences really hinder climate action, especially between China and the EU? Are we able to park it, or is it a huge roadblock?
Well, of course, we're talking about the differences today, but in reality, if you seriously looking into the reality, we're not that much different. Because we all belong to this one species on this planet. We live within the planetary boundary. And at this moment, we do need to figure out how to somehow work together, rethink, redesign, and, reimagining and what we should do, how we develop our economy, how to build our infrastructure, and how to utilize more, renewable energy, clean energy in order to make sure we are more united than ever to address the global climate challenges there. So yes, in reality, at this very moment, the geopolitical differences seem to be blocking the pace and the scale that are needed in order to accelerate the transition. But when we talk about the climate action, there are different ways or directions or dimensions to talk about it. On one side, actually, at the national level, and if you look at the countries, 195 countries already signed up this commitment to Paris Agreement. What does that mean? That means national governments have already taken steps to internalize all those commitments into their national planning, national policy, regulations, standards, national budget, all kinds of actions in order to transition away from fossil fuels and towards a much cleaner, smart future. And of course, at the international level, we do have a Paris Agreement. We all agreed somehow to use the multilateral climate governance to advance the agenda to make sure globally developed countries will be able to better support the developing countries somehow to adapt the climate crisis. In the meantime, to accelerate their transition towards a green, clean future. And then at the core of the climate actions, as I mentioned earlier, is about investment in technology, investment in talent, expertise, investment in industrial value chains, investing in infrastructure, right? And we have to make sure the global financial institutions, the financial system, global trade system, of course, together with the global environmental governance, they need to align. They need to come together. Otherwise, we cannot possibly address the current climate crisis, which is global, which requires actions at all levels, national level, local level, regional level, even down to community level, you name it. That's the sense of urgency we're talking about here today. That's why, yes, on one side, we do have differences, but in the meantime, we need to keep an open mind, make sure we open our door and open the platforms, having dialogues to make sure we know each other, understand each other. In the meantime, to build up more synergy and alignment in order to make sure we collectively, we address those challenges and also to build a more sustainable future.
Okay, message received. I'm not going to dwell on the problems. We've talked about the problems a lot here today. So let's focus, Genevieve, on solutions perhaps for a moment. What are the key areas of climate action that need to be addressed immediately? Is it still that 1.5 degrees target that we've heard so much of over so many years? And how can China and the EU work together to address them?
Mm-hmm. So 1.5, according to the last data of the World Meteorological Organization, is already behind us.
Yeah.
We are at 1.55, the hottest year, in history. So still, and maybe even more, we must mitigate. So we must cut emissions, not only CO2 emissions, but all greenhouse gases emissions. And actually, as has been said, the announcement by Mr. Xi Jinping that China will now address the emissions of all sorts of greenhouse gases in every sector, that's a very important announcement. So we must continue on this pathway. Europe is set also to present its new nationally determined contribution for 2035, and we are waiting for the discussion on the 2040 target. Hopefully it will be minus 90% of emissions by 2040. But I think both China and the EU must come very well ahead of COP30 with ambitious targets. And now I give you just a very small anecdote. Spring 2015, I was heading WWF European office at that time. We knew that the Paris COP21 will be a success, because the EU was not alone. We learned, spring 2015, that both the US and China will agree to ambitious targets. So this is very important. Let's forget, unfortunately, about the US now. But it's even more important that the EU and China come ahead of COP30 with very ambitious targets. Now, adaptation is an absolute necessity. We were speaking of terrible possibility, but now not at all out of reach, that Himalayan ice melts. If Himalayan ice melts, even more than it already does, then you have millions of lives which are under threat. Let's imagine also if the ice of the Southern Ocean, Antarctica, melts. It's 90% of the ice of the world. If it melts 7 meters higher for the sea, which means that most of the cities, coastal cities, will disappear. So let's understand that we are facing terrible challenges. And now I want to make a link between biodiversity and climate. China has been promoting the Kunming-Montreal Protocol, and we have a Kunming-Montreal framework. We have a target of protecting 30% of land and ocean by 2030. And you know that the ocean is absorbing 95% of supplementary heat. It's also an excellent carbon sink. It's an excellent carbon sink if it is full of life. So we must respect life in the ocean, because an ocean which is rich of life absorbs more carbon dioxide. And let's come back to the Southern Ocean. If we protect areas around Southern Ocean, we are not far from the target of 30%, then we are protecting not only biodiversity worldwide, but we are protecting our climate. So that's a very important common endeavor for EU and China.
Let's just have a quick final thought before we throw things open to our audience here and questions in Brussels. Marjun, just a final word from you perhaps on this particular moment. What's your take on what you've heard? How do you see China-EU cooperation? I mean, there are different stages in this green transformation, aren't they? We kind of assume that every country is in the same place, heading at the same speed in the same direction. That's not necessarily so, is it?
Absolutely, but we all recognize there's only one planet home, and I'm so glad to see EU have been a torchbearer, and in the meantime, and China from some country who participate to now try to be also a global leader in climate action. I think as mentioned by the guest, setting a target is extremely important. So that's why the 2020 target set for China's peak and neutrality target, I think, continue to play an important role, and I could see that because of that, China has been expanding its renewable capacity, for energy transition in a relentless way, and our 2030 target set for the renewable energy for wind and solar have been achieved last year, and now that expansion is still growing, still being conducted in a exponential way, and in the meantime, we have also seen because 68% of all this emission is related to the fact that we are the factory of the world, so the industries is a major emitter, and with that, China has been spending huge efforts to try to decarbonize. Of course, we need policy support from the government, but in the meantime, how to mobilize the power from the market? There's a lot to learn from EU, which have the best, the most mature carbon market, and China, earlier this year, also made an expansion of the carbon trade market, and now, more encouragingly, we see that China's now trying to embrace not just TCFD, but now the new ISSB standards for corporate accounting and reporting, and based on that, we as an NGO are trying to motivate and compile all this corporate emission. So far, it's close to 6 billion tons being disclosed, and we compile them and make them accessible. I think this is going to help, this level of transparency eventually going to help, to green the supply chain between China and EU, and also green the financial investment. And on the green taxonomy side, I think China and EU also have a very good potential to collaborate.
Marjun, thank you for that. And panellists, do stay with us, please. Just stay where you are, because we're just going to take a few moments to take questions from our audience here in Brussels. Ladies and gentlemen, you know the usual form. Please raise your hand and we'll run a microphone to you. Please let us know your name and your organisation that you represent. So who wants to have our first question? Put your hand in the air and we'll run a microphone to you. Who's going to go first here in Brussels? Any takers to go first? Any takers? No questions? Anyone in the back? No questions at all. Oh, well, that gets us back on time. That's very good news indeed. Last offer for any questions? Yes, gentlemen here. Just let us get a microphone to you. Thank you very much. Hello, welcome. Tell us your name and your organisation and your question.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much for all of your express space. My name is Bo Xianhuang. I'm a PhD researcher on European Union policy and institutions, especially for justice and home affairs at VUB. Yeah, so I know that EU started a new climate change program called Fit for 55 from 2023. So my question would be that, does there any contact in this program about international cooperation, especially cooperation with China on this project?
Genevieve, I'm going to let you do that because you're more likely to know the details than the other guys. So a quick response to that.
No, I'm sorry, but I don't know because I am no longer in the European Commission. I've been there 22 years, but I'm no longer there. So I think that maybe Caroline, who is here, could give an answer.
That's called dodging responsibility, I think. But you're welcome to answer should you so wish. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to our next section, and thank you for getting us back on time as well. Thank you for your questions, sir. It's very generous of you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to invite now our distinguished guests from the first row here. I think we can also say goodbye to our panellists, the wonderful Mao Jun and Wu Changhua, and also thank you, Genevieve, so much for being such a good sport. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our panellists, please. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to ask our distinguished guests from the front two rows to join us here on stage to get a photo of this wonderful occasion. No conference, as you know, is complete without a photo or a selfie. So if I could ask all of you to come up on stage, be careful coming up onto stage because there's a couple of steps. That's not the photo we want. So please come up and we'll have a photo. And in just a few moments, we'll tell you about what's happening in part two. But let's just have a photo first of all. We'll play you some Eurovision music while this takes place. I promise it's not very long. Bunch up, guys, and we'll get everyone in together. Can we get everyone in? Let's see if we can squeeze up together. Squeeze up a little more, guys. Hope we can get everybody in. Are we all in? Okay. Say null point. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your photograph. And I promised you there wouldn't be too much Eurovision music, and in fact, actually that was worse than most of the Eurovision music. So thank you in the gallery for playing that. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a break for coffee in just a few moments. Before you get up and go, I would like just to ask you to get back on your phone for another quick poll, because it's interesting gathering so many distinguished people here and getting your insight on your thoughts on this. So another quick poll. Again, either scan the QR code at the bottom right of your programs or go to slido.com and enter the code CGTN. And the question coming up now, let me read it out in case you're joining us virtually and you can't quite see this, but the question we're seeing here in Brussels is, what's the most powerful driver of societal climate action today? And you now have 5 options, ladies and gentlemen. Please get voting. Here are the options. government-led policies and regulations, so we're talking national climate laws or carbon taxes perhaps, local and grassroots initiatives, so community projects, NGOs, youth movements and so on, or is it international cooperation and agreements perhaps, COP summits, things like that, China-EU climate deals? Maybe you think it's all down to the private sector, innovation and investment, green tech, sustainable business models and so on. Or perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, it's individual behavior and lifestyle changes, reducing our consumption, the way we vote, or activism. This is the cue for all of those of you who walked or cycled here today. You can also, by the way, vote during the break, and we will bring you the results as they keep on changing in front of us here in Brussels. We'll bring you the results of that poll after this short break, when we will also mark the official release of our exclusive report, Powering the Twin Engines, Navigating China-EU Climate Cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your company so far. We will see you again in, can we say, 15 minutes. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our special event, Towards a Green Future. And before I press on with the official launch of our report, just a reminder of the poll we took over the break. I hope you all managed to vote. Here in Brussels, you can now see on the big screens the question we asked earlier on and the results. We asked you earlier on what's the most powerful driver of societal climate action today, and out in front by a country mile, as they say in the UK, government-led policies and regulations sits on 59% of your support, and everything else dwindling, left behind in pretty much half those figures. International cooperation agreements on 17%, private sector innovation and investment on 13%, local and grassroots initiative on 7%, and individual behaviour and lifestyle changes sitting on 4%. It's interesting stuff, and thank you very much indeed to everyone who voted. Ladies and gentlemen, now to the key moment of today's event, the launch of our report commissioned by CGTN Europe to mark 50 years of China-EU diplomatic ties, powering the twin engines navigating China-EU climate cooperation. It examines the achievements and the challenges facing Europe and China and how they might work together to ease the transition to a greener future. What new technology is out there? How might artificial intelligence help? And how can geopolitical hurdles be overcome? Well, we're very proud to say that in perhaps a perfect example of China-EU cooperation, the report begins with forwards from two eminent experts, Xie Zhenhua, China's first special envoy on climate change, and Jost Becker, the former Director General for Climate Action at the European Commission. But first, to tell us more about the granular detail of this fascinating report, let's hear now from one of the Chinese writing team on the report, Dr. Wang Binbin from Peking University.
Good afternoon, dear friends and colleagues. I'm Binbin from Peking University. It's my great pleasure to support this report and share my insights from China's perspective. This is my 16th year tracking the UNFCCC process. My first COP is COP15 in Copenhagen in 2009. Over this time, I have witnessed China's involvement role in global climate governance, from participant to an active contributor. For instance, around 2015, China issued joint statements with France and the US, laying a solid foundation for the Paris Agreement. Nowadays, China plays a joint leadership role alongside the EU and other countries. Regarding international financial support, China has provided and mobilized over 177 billion RMB since 2016. In 2020, China announced its goals to peak carbon emission before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. The dual carbon goal has been integrated into China's ecological civilization framework and national economic development strategy. At present, China has established its 1+N policy framework for implementation at both national and provincial levels, similar in ambition to the EU's Green Deal. The one refers the State Council's working guidance for carbon peak and carbon neutrality, as well as the action plan for carbon peak before 2030, which provides a roadmap to turn the dual carbon goal into a green engine for high-quality economic growth. The N refers to supportive policies and implementation plans across different sectors and provinces, which means at local level. Under this framework, if you have a chance to visit China, you will find that carbon neutrality is really a popular term across the whole country. Based on my recent research, more than 90% of respondents were confident that China will reach the goal. While carbon neutrality is a new mission for all countries and no existing pathway ahead. So under the principles of UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, each country, each nation must proactively and innovatively explore its own transition pathway. From this perspective, China's efforts include key breakthroughs in renewable energy, the National Strategy for Adaptation, jointly issued by 17 ministries, the localization of nature-based solutions to address both climate change and biodiversity loss, the development of dual-track carbon trading system, ETS and CCER, and a lot of bottom-up climate actions. I had the privilege of being a World Fellow at Yale University while I spent the second half of 2023 following the pandemic. During my time there, I encountered strong concerns regarding China's coal consumption. Some voices call for China to immediately shut down all coal mines, given its global leadership in renewable energy investments. However, the reality is that as a proportion of renewable energy, such as wind and solar, in crisis, ensuring grid stability and managing peak demands remains a critical global challenge. This is a bottleneck for all countries. The major power outage in Spain and Portugal a few days ago is an example. Now is a momentum for all stakeholders to confront this common challenge and explore diverse, just, and inclusive solutions together. As we know, that 2024 last year is the warmest year on record. Meanwhile, considering the US withdrawal from Paris Agreement again, and accelerating development and also challenges of AI and digital technologies, China and the EU have a long way to go to reach the common goal about carbon neutrality. Strengthened cooperation is vital to bridge existing gaps and sustain momentum in the fight against climate change. After a while, my colleague from IEEP, Chiara, will share our recommendations. Last but not least, as a social scientist, I would like to close on a philosophical and a cultural note. Confucius and Aristotle are two great thinkers from the East and the West. Though they lived in different times and regions, both of them emphasize the importance of balance. Their ideas inspire us today to respect nature, follow its laws, and pursue a future where harmony between human and nature can be truly achieved. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Dr. Wang Binbin, please. That was Dr. Wang Binbin from the Institute of Carbon Neutrality at Peking University. It's a great honour. I'm delighted to welcome another of the co-authors of this report here on stage in person in Brussels, Dr. Chiara Antonelli from the Institute for European Environmental Policy. Would you give her a round of applause, please?
Okay, great. Thank you very much for inviting me today. And it's actually an honor to be here. And as this marks the 50th anniversary of our diplomatic relationship between China and the EU, relationship that has started with very modest beginning, and then it completed with a global, one of the world's largest global agreement and trade ships. As has been mentioned before, this is also a report, as this report is also, I would say, a production of a EU-China cooperation. And as this has been delivered by CGTN with the contributions by IEEP and the Peking University, as you've heard quite shortly before. Just let me give very shortly, few key points from a European perspective. And what we attempted to do, even if in a nutshell, was to try to show how our actions individually and globally, well, let's say together, have tried to shape and are still shaping global climate governance. First of all, let me make just a very simple and but very important point that multilateralism is key in order to tackle challenges like climate change. That, let's remember that this transcends any border. So from the EU perspective, I would say that EU has long championed very ambitious climate policies. And also together with China individually, and then together, we have even pushed further this global climate processes. And this even further reinforces the importance and the relevance of cooperation, especially under the UNFCCC. When we looked at climate mitigation, of course, we wanted to understand and underline also the relevance of EU experience that has been key in terms of advancing clean energy transition when we look at energy technology, clean technology, and also its policy frameworks. So the Green Deal, and more specifically the Fit for 55, have set up some very important and ambitious emission reduction targets. So these targets, as you know, have been accompanied by also measures related to fostering innovation and also including what has been highlighted also today, just transition. Climate adaptation has been another point that we looked at, and it is also a rising and important growing priority in the EU. The EU adaptation strategy, for instance, underlines also capacity building on resilience, and also the importance and the relevance of ecosystem-based approach. This actually resonated quite nicely also, as it has been highlighted in the report, with EU Natura 2000 networks on biodiversity conservation and Chinese spatial planning. And yet we really still see an opportunity to integrate both China and EU efforts on this, especially if we take on board natural-based solutions as more important tools in order to enhance climate adaptation, just climate resilience, I would say, and carbon sinks and biodiversity conservation. In this, we can actually both advance together and try to find solutions that could both benefit our regions. When we looked at climate finance, so one of the main, of course, important and relevant points was that carbon markets and more generally market-based instruments are key in order to enhance emission reductions. On this point, actually, we see that, as a matter of fact, the EU has, with the EU emission trading system, the world's largest carbon market in the world. We've also seen very promising steps coming forward with the China ETS and its voluntary carbon markets. And it's also important to see that altogether with China, there's been advancement in fostering collaboration and cooperation on carbon markets as the common understanding was signed last year. But together with all this advancement and progress, I would also like to make this point that both China and the EU, as global actors, but also as major polluters, have the urgent and common responsibility to tackle climate change. So climate change and digital innovation are something that we should not set aside when we look at both together. And this is why the report tries to look ahead and give some recommendations related to this. As you can see also in the screen, there is something that we try to highlight in that. But we really see that there is still space and importance to enhance multilateralism and mutual understanding, I would say, from both sides, especially on climate action, as said before. There is importance to strengthening and encouraging also harmony, I would say, between climate frameworks and especially looking at international climate finance. As has been said before, the importance and the relevance of looking also at third countries is necessary in capacity building. Collaboration and cooperation on research and innovation is key. And that specifically looks at topics like clean technology, energy storage, and let's not forget that circular economy. I would also like to make the point that as has been repeated several times today, climate adaptation is something really important to look at together. So encouraging these efforts toward adaptation, especially bringing on board nature-based solutions and similar approaches, should be envisaged by both and jointly. As Binbin just mentioned before, we were talking about two philosophers that were talking about, let's say, harmony between human and nature. Well, let's say that this is what we should aim at when looking at this joint leadership that could bring a stronger global climate processes together. Thank you.
Dr. Antonelli, thank you so much indeed. It's great to hear you, and we're delighted that you were able to join us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, we're also joined now by Carl Falkenberg, the former Director General for Environment at the European Commission, and also a great pleasure to welcome Nick Mabey, CEO and co-founder of the independent climate think tank E3G. Joining us virtually from London, I hope, is Jiangwen Guo, Senior Research Fellow from the Environment and Society Centre at Chatham House. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel, would you give them a round of applause, please? Thank you very much. Let me begin, if I might, with Carl, please. We'll dive into more detail on the recommendations of this report in just a few moments, but I just want to refer back to the panel. We've still got the question and the results on the poll that we took earlier. Do these results surprise you? Let me just remind you the question, what's the most powerful driver of societal climate action today? And out in front by 57%, government-led policies and regulations. So that, it's surprising? Carl?
It is surprising, but I think it is due to the audience here. And
they're all pointy-head, well-informed activists,
that we have.
That's what you're saying.
Perhaps it's also the fact that this is Brussels.
Yep.
I think Brussels understands the value of regulation. And so this result is not a surprise, and I would actually sign up to it. But I have a little but. The government-led policies and regulations are essential, but they give the impression that we can solve these problems, each one of us, at home. And that's just completely beside the point. Europe is still emitting a rough 7% of greenhouse gas emissions, even if we became perfect with regulation. And we're in 2 years down to zero. The rest of the world continues emitting, 93% will continue, and the planet will become a sauna. We have already exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius. So there is an urgency to actually get the number one and the number two together. And I'm not quite sure whether international cooperation in the end shouldn't have come top, because we need to understand that we have to not just work in our respective areas, but we have to work together. And that means that at the end of the day, for Europe, my deep conviction is more important that we show a model, that we show solutions that can be replicated by others. So if we spend enormous amounts of efforts and money to become perfect, but it's so expensive that no one else wants to follow us, then it's a waste. We need to think about showing examples that others will want to replicate, because it gives you economic development, it gives you jobs, it gives you a fair amount of shared wealth on this planet.
Let's bring in Jiangwen Guo. Is that how you see it? All of these factors are important, aren't they?
Yeah, I fully agree. All of them are important. However, maybe a little bit different than just Carl mentioned that. So in my view, so like the government governance and the policies and the individual actions, and also, for example, some other engagement, let's say they are the essential pillars to a building, including the international cooperation. However, each of them has their own focuses. So on the other hand, I would like to emphasize that because the climate change is a common challenging for everyone. It's not the challenging for each individual country, either nor to the individual person. So that's meaning whatever the target, for example, 1.5 degree or 2 degree, whatever it is. So that is a common goal for everyone, for every country. So for everyone, so for all countries. So that's meaning that implies that the international cooperation is essential because we have to have a joint effort to address climate change so that we can work together to tackle this common goal. So that's my view. Thank you.
Dr. Antonelli, the key recommendation of the report, it seems to me, is enhancing strategic communication and perhaps mutual understanding between China and the EU. How might that happen?
That's a very important question, actually, to put on the table. I think there are several channels that should be used. So first of all, high-level communication and high-level discussion is essential. And this does not refer necessarily or exclusively just to a mere dialogue. So we have there already the high-level discussion as an international platform on exchanges on environment and climate, and yet we still should, we should further institutionalize this sort of exchanges, make them more structured, transparent, and action-oriented. But this should also go beyond policymakers and policy officers. They should also include broader participation from people. If we think, for instance, about initiatives like city-to-city partnerships, these are very interesting opportunities also to have sister-in cities, I would say. And this could also be encouraged through business innovation fora, where this could actually be used as a core joint innovation hub. And we have also informal dialogue. So Track 2, for instance, is an example of that. But more informal dialogues, especially between researchers and but also civil societies in both regions, should be taken seriously in consideration and to deepen more.
Let's bring Nick in here. I mean, you specialize in climate diplomacy and foreign policy. Do you see a better path to a better understanding between China and the EU? We seem to be doing more discord around the world than dialogue at the moment.
I think you have to look at two levels. So it's true, the people-to-people engagement between Europe and China has massively dropped off since COVID, and all of the things in the report have been going on for decades, and we've been a strong part of that. We need to rebuild that. That's great. But actually, even with that, Europe and China, 70% of the global clean economy between them, first driven by European renewable subsidies that incentivized the Chinese renewable industry, have grown global clean investment from 400 billion in Paris, 2015, to 2.1 trillion last year. They didn't need us to do cooperative workshops on that. What they needed is to build economic confidence and investment. And that's what we need going forward. And I think one of the things I would say, extraordinary times require extraordinary measures. And I think Europe and China need to build extraordinary confidence in the clean markets they have developed and grown, because what we're hearing in a poll today on business executives saying their biggest lack of confidence, the reason why their business won't grow in clean energy, is political uncertainty. They need to send a signal at the summit this year of that continuing process. There's lots of concrete things you can do, but fundamentally, we've grown it together. We need to incentivize it and drive it forward together. And that is a much kind of deeper sign of collaboration than kind of the talking, which is great. Is actually, are we doing together? Are we aligned?
I want to drill down with Carl on this. I mean, the green transition can't just be based on policy, can it really? I mean, any agreements between China and the EU need practical applications. I mean, as former Director General of the Environment at the European Commission, how hard is it to move from talk to action?
That's the real challenge of governance, and I guess it's the real challenge for anyone who sits in governance. Governments can talk to each other. They can decide frameworks through regulation and give direction, as Nick was saying, and I think that's important. But it needs to be then taken up by concrete actions, and that's where I think we need to we need to have communication. We need to talk. We need to show examples. I'm very much more believing, as I already said in my first reaction, in showing things that work, because they will be replicated by others. When we started investing, or asking our industry to invest in solar energy, when we asked to invest in wind energy, a lot of people were looking at us and saying, what are you doing? You're going to get out of this world. I mean, lack of competitiveness, complete disaster for industrial situations in Europe, etc., etc. China began to look at this and said, hey, this is a cheap form of energy. And if you can produce cheap form of energy, you're going to become more competitive and not less competitive. And so China went into this and picked it up and overtook us. China now has more investments in solar and in wind than we in Europe, and even better, holds more patents in solar and in wind. So we need to really come back and strongly give the indication to our own societies that, hey, we launched early a direction, we still believe in it. What we do in reality, and here in Brussels you know it, we have been talking about the Green Deal and putting it at the top of what we wanted to achieve in Europe, and suddenly we do a Clean Industrial Act. And no one is quite clear in his mind, what is this Clean Industrial Act? Is it a U-turn away from Green Deal? Or is it just a way of showing that the Green Deal is also valid in industrial policies, and that the industrial policies have to become green, and that it will actually be competitive if they become green? So we need to get these things sorted out, but fundamentally, we and China have to show that this is feasible, that it is economically feasible, and then others will replicate, and we can talk about reducing not just our 7% emission, but the 100% emissions of the global economy. And that's what we need to focus on.
Chiara, here's something else we need to sort out. Joint research, presumably, and innovation, which are both going to be key to the green transition. I mean, what are the real opportunities for EU and China to work together? And aside from this report that we've done, obviously the perfect example of EU-China working together, is this already happening?
I would say that the perfect example is yet to come, of course. I must say that there are some interesting opportunities and some interesting initiatives already there. For instance, there's the China-EU co-funding mechanisms that has actually funded several projects, mostly on energy storage and biofuels. There are also initiatives in member states with a Sino-German track to dialogue. There's the China-France Carbon Center. But I think there is still quite some room there for improvement, let's say. And there are specific topics or sectors where we could actually act together. For instance, on urban climate resilience, both regions have been highly and widely affected by extreme weather events, and as such there is definitely room to work together. For instance, also merging missions, EU mission cities with relevant and related China's initiatives. We also have, I think, room for improvement on agricultural adaptation as well. And for sure, circularity and critical raw materials are something that are quite high among our priorities. For instance, harmonization and circularity metrics would something that would be really helpful for both of us, and also in order to push it forward for multilateralism, as well as investigating more on industrial symbiosis models. That's just
well, let's pick up the harmonization idea with Zhang Guo. Another key recommendation in our report talks about aligning or harmonizing, whichever word you want to use, aligning climate finance to support what's called a just transition. This is a phrase that China's president used for the first time, I think, only relatively recently. What does that harmonization, or what does that alignment look like to you?
Well, in my understanding, actually, there is no standardized definition of just transition. So maybe we could have some kind of different interpretation. If like the COP28, the UAE consensus mentioned that. So we should transition away from the fossil fuel of the energy transition in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. So that's a bit narrow view to look at the energy just transition. However, as you just mentioned, that the Chinese President Xi recently, in his remarks, this just transition is much broader than this. So that could including the poverty alleviation and the environment production and even, for example, some social development and economic growth. So that's meaning we are facing some challenging. That's meaning nobody knows what is the best story. There is no completed successful story. Everyone still is learn by doing. Then that implies for me that, for example, what is the best technology pathway, and where is the, like you mentioned, the finance, where's the money, and also including the capacity building, and all of this as back to the first question I just mentioned, that I do believe international cooperation is essential to tackle this issue.
Where's the money? Well, Nick, that's a good place to pick up. The demands on climate finance are very different from developed countries like those in the EU and developing countries like China, aren't they?
Yeah, though we still face the challenge of retooling our whole financial system to invest in this new economy. It's very different to the old economy in scale and business model. And actually, an area where China and Europe have co-designed and built is the new market regulations, whether it's taxonomies, green bond markets. Actually, China was ahead on some, Europe moved up, especially through the Trump 1 presidency, they kept that momentum going. And again, back to investor confidence, I think if Europe and China, working with London and Singapore and other major financial, Tokyo, really committed, make sure we committed to carrying forward things the US has rolled back on in terms of integrating climate into financial market regulation, and go forward at the IMF and the Basel Committee and others to keep the momentum going that we're going to put climate on the balance sheet. We're going to align our investment and our incentives in macroeconomics and in financial markets around this transition. That will be part, along with things like ambitious NDCs, of giving the large pools of capital, which we need to move and accelerate into this area, the confidence that's going forward. Because they've suffered a shock of the US pulling back. But the US is 15% of the global clean energy economy. That's 2 years, under 2 years of growth. We can overcome that speed bump, but we need to be ambitious in the way we align and retool our system. Because at the moment, what I'm hearing, everybody's hearing what the Americans are doing. They're not hearing what Europe and China are doing as the people who own the low-carbon economy, that they are investing in the future, back to Carl's point. So that's getting above the noise level is one of the ways we have to do that, and being bold.
Now, thank you for getting back to Carl's point, because I want to get at one of Carl's points. Carl, if international agreement is going to improve, do we need to rethink gatherings like the COP summits? I hate to quote people's words back at them, and this is very unkind, but you were quoted earlier this year saying, and these are your words, not mine, Carl Falkenberg, the COP system is not in good shape. So what needs to change, and how can China and the EU work together to change it? You did say that, didn't you? Just to be, I just want to check. Okay.
I stand by what I said.
Okay, good, fine.
I stand by what I said. I'm not running away from
it.
Okay. I had the pleasure or the pain of participating in 2009 in a Copenhagen COP, so I have life experience of the circus, as I call it. I just don't honestly believe that it is something that is efficient in working to have so many delegations and so many spectators around in one environment. I remember difficulties of actually getting to a negotiating room because the corridors were so filled with spectators, with NGOs, with businesses, with all sorts of journalists, yes, you name them. And it just, for a negotiator, it was literally difficult to get to a place where he was supposed to do his duty. If I look at climate change more narrowly. I mean, what I say goes for biodiversity, goes for basically all of these international conferences. What we need is those people that are mainly concerned can get together and try to solve the problem. I could imagine a situation where mitigation would be solved by, I'll take a number, 30 major emitters. They would probably cover 95 to 98% of our emissions. Not 180 countries, but just 30. Take the biggest. They are the ones that need to get together and actually take these decisions. On mitigation, on adaptation, I can concede that more countries would want to have a say, because they all are feeling the effects of climate change. But we need to find rooms where those that are literally mainly concerned by an issue have a place where they can negotiate without being watched or disturbed or whatever by people who actually can contribute very little.
Okay, you fixed COP. Congratulations. What an extraordinary achievement to have come out of this afternoon. You fixed COP. Let's talk at more solutions. Dr. Chiara, we've talked a lot about innovation. We wouldn't be doing our duty if we didn't bring up artificial intelligence. No conference or news program, of course, is complete without talking about artificial intelligence. How do you see artificial intelligence helping in the fight against climate change? Does it, or is it irrelevant?
I would say that there's a very delicate balance to strike here with climate change and artificial intelligence, because of course artificial intelligence, AI, is a very relevant and powerful tool, especially if you think, for instance, on more accurate weather forecasts and preparedness and responsiveness to that, but also in generally monitoring and improving renewable deployment of renewable energy as well as energy systems, or even monitoring better the circularity ladder and as such reducing landfill waste and then GHG emissions. But at the same time, we have to be very much aware of the fact that this brings also an important consumption of electricity. Electricity demand is going to rise and is rising quite a lot because of this. This also means building additional data centers, and this also creates disruptions, of course, and many more environmental risks. So, of course, there are many pros for the use of AI in the fight against climate change and adaptation, but at the same time we have to be very much aware of the risks. So it's important to carefully assess and try as much as possible to absorb them in our models, let's say, in our actions when we use them.
Jiang Guo is nodding her head there. Jiang Guo, as quoted in our report at the 4th China-EU high-level environmental and climate dialogue, it was stated that green is the distinctive colour of China-EU cooperation, and our report goes on calling the two sides twin engines of global climate leadership. How do we ensure it stays that way?
Like you just mentioned, the reason I just keep on nodding is because I fully echo that the AI does bring both the opportunities and the challenges for us to helping us to tackle the climate change. And just as you mentioned that in the paper it's two engines. So that's meaning, as you just mentioned, as we have been talking whole this afternoon, even the geopolitics context. So there are a lot of uncertainties. Then among all of these uncertainties, EU and China, it could go further in tightened cooperation. That provides a very unique certainty among the uncertainties. I think that is important, especially nowadays.
Nick, I cut you off, and I know you were trying to get in, so I'm going to give you a couple of moments just to say what you were going to contribute earlier.
Well, I'm going to respectfully disagree with Carl. We did in 2009 as well. My first COP.
Why be respectful? Just disagree.
Because I'm always respectful in public, anyway. My first COP was 1997 in Kyoto. I've been to most of them, and you went to the Aberration COP, which was really badly run as a diplomatic project. Sorry, Denmark. But everybody's told you that already. The fact is that the circus is what makes us deliver. Actually, one of the things Europe and China agrees is you shouldn't sew up a mitigation treaty without those countries most impacted by it in the room. And we generally agreed on that to keep the US from trying to do that. Because that was when the US was the world's largest emitter, it really wanted to have a mitigation-only treaty without those vulnerable countries. That was a geopolitical decision, which I still think is the right one. I was involved in making that when Bush drew out of the Kyoto Protocol. So I think we've got to look at this. This has actually been a really massive diplomatic success. Actually, EU-China has been a massive diplomatic success. We do need it to pick up the momentum. And I think we'll come back. I do think resilience, grid management, lots of very practical things to do. But if the real challenge for Europe and China is can they get investment to the rest of the emerging economies? And that's an area they've failed to work on in the past. And I think that's one of the frontier areas we need to come. And Carl can object to my climate diplomacy analysis. But again, I must admit, I don't think any of the agreements I've been in those rooms would have happened without the circus. If you feel well-managed circus, I was advisor to Glasgow, so badly managed circus, I agree, disruptive. Well-managed circus, pressure on governments to do what their citizens want. If you use it well, the circus can be a really powerful diplomatic tool.
In one sentence, the circus.
I still think that when you say that the circus has been effective, look at reality. We are overshooting 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are on nowhere of a pace where we need to go. We are into a hot world because all of these emissions that we have sent up there will be there for the next 40 to 60 to 80 years. And if you look at these curbs and the necessity to actually bring them down, we are really not at pace with the ambition that we declare. And I still find it. Yeah, but
It's not the NGOs who did that, it's the governments decided not to meet those
goals. But a convention that says we want to maintain 1.5 and then makes national commitments that add up to 3.5 degree warming, I mean, how can anyone call this a success?
We're going to move on, because you two will never agree, and it's wonderful to watch. Ladies and
gentlemen. More interesting than the usual Brussels debate.
Yeah, terrific, fascinating stuff. We will give you your own programme. Ladies and gentlemen, another of the key recommendations of this report is that young people in China and the EU really need to come together to work for a greener future. It's a great pleasure to see Kyle Oberman here, the filmmaker and photographer and biodiversity expert. Kyle, I know you've spent ages traveling and filming in China, some of it with young people. I wonder what... It's a terrible generalization to talk about young people, but in terms of the experience that you've had talking to young people, what were their thoughts on climate change?
Yes, it's a really good question. I've had the privilege and the difficulty of working for Western clients making content for Chinese audience and working for Chinese clients making content for Western audiences and navigating both. So on the whole, about 90% of people in China do believe that climate change is human-caused, and they're very supportive of government climate action. When we think about young people, these are people that grew up in a generation where they saw the transition from air pollution being a very massive issue to that being cleaned up through government policies, regulation, and transition to EVs, e-bikes, and electrification of the economy. And so young people have a very high optimism for what the government can do and what technology can do. What's also interesting is that they have a very optimistic partake on what they can do as individuals, which is interesting looking at the poll, and they don't have a lot of vitriol against large companies, which is you see in the West. And the last point I will make, which is very relevant to discussion today, is they are frustrated about Western historical emissions. Although China has now passed the EU in terms of historical CO2 emissions, the United States, of course, is still ahead. But when you look at per capita historical emissions, the average person in the US has a 7 times higher emission rate than a Chinese person, and the EU is 3 times higher. And they are very frustrated about, and so addressing that historical gap is going to be very important when you think about talking to Chinese youth and engaging them on climate change.
Let's talk about solutions. So given all of that and your experiences traveling and talking and filming people, what do you think would help bring young people, not just in China, but frankly all around the world, together to fight climate change?
I'm saying this, yes, in the backdrop of what the Trump administration is doing and tariffs, and we're seeing kind of a closing global order. But for young people, we talk about human exchange, technological exchange, and idea exchange. Open borders, open communication and trade is so important. And also language. I know that, yes, we're in an AI era. You can translate anything you want. But really learning a language beyond the lingua franca, beyond English, learning Mandarin, actually taking the time to connect culturally is how productive discussions on a human level and productive agreements get made.
Thank you very much for your contributions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a few moments just to take questions from our audience here in Brussels. Usual format, as I said before, if you'd like to raise your hand, we'll run a microphone to you. If you could please tell us your name and the organization you represent. And we've got a couple of questions down here. Let me start with the lady in the second row. We'll get a microphone to you now. Good afternoon, welcome. Your name and your organization, please.
Good afternoon, Arvea Mariani. I'm a director in a couple of companies, and also I'm climate diplomacy expert. I published, for instance, in Treccani recently. The reason why maybe the COP hasn't been successful is because while the ministries for environment were negotiating throughout all the process, in the rooms whereby decisions were made on economics or wherever in the governments, the commitments or the wording was not upheld because it was an economic question. That is, until there was no binding agreement, which is still not there. And the process itself, as I had the pleasure to observe it, a long story, through the eyes of, for instance, Minister Xie Zhenhua or former negotiator for Italy for many years, Corrado Clini, has been the only process that has allowed a level of convergence.
Nick, if you can handle that briefly, please.
It's true that the major voice speaking against higher ambition in lots of countries is the economic ministry, and it's more about in the old days, it was because clean energy was more expensive. Now clean energy is cheaper in 85% of countries. Now it's because of disruption to incumbents. And one of the reasons why we think actually that's where Europe and China can work with finance ministries to actually integrate the costs of climate into their calculations, because no finance ministry in the world accurately includes those costs. And it's obviously it's looking at one side of the ledger and not the other, and you get the kind of answers we see in reality. So that's one of the big barriers to change.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to squeeze in a few more questions. Gentleman in the front row here who's been very patient, who's been trying to get in. If you tell us your name and the organization, and a brief question, please.
Yes, of course. My name is Ingmar. I'm the CEO of Climate & Company, one of Europe's leading sustainable finance think tanks. Spent the last 27 years working on that stuff, a long time at the European Commission and the UN. My question is, I would like to hear a bit more concrete stuff, and I want to just two very, very, very brief points. So private innovation and investment is key. Investors need signals. So the first question, don't we need a very specific joint effort in actually building a level playing field between China and EU, because we need competition to drive down costs. So we have been hitting around the bush here a little bit, but we need that competition to drive down cost, but we need the governance in place. So do we not, like Dr. Majun was saying before, don't we actually need them to agree on transparency rules and maybe due diligence rules? First question. Second question is, don't we need more very specific plurilateral sector-specific action? Because 90% of emissions are in 15 out of 250 sectors. Isn't that something that these two blocks could actually push forward?
Carl.
I think the very important points, all of those, I would I would want to pick up the second, and it goes back to the overall energy use. I mean, a lot of what we create for climate, bad news, is energy related in one form or another. That's why certain sectors take larger shares than others. And essentially, we're trying to electrify our energy sectors. And you were saying renewables are in production cost the cheapest form of energy now, but we need to look at the distribution. We need to focus on the grids. And Brussels is just beginning to learn that we're not focusing just on how do we produce energy, but how do we distribute energy. And it was interesting in this conference to hear that in China, the same awareness is there, because we heard someone explain to us that China is the largest investor in renewable energy, but needs to continue coal production to stabilize the grid. And that's where we have a huge problem, and where I would come in contradicting the position that was explained by China. But they now have the example of Portugal and Spain, and what we need to do, we need to collectively identify those and come up with the technological answers. How do we stabilize an energy net that is based on renewables? If we had answers to that, then the cost to the user, not just the cost of producing the energy, but the cost to the user would come down, and I'm absolutely convinced that that would then be taken up by vast majority of countries and vast majority of sectors. So there are things where we can cooperate and where competition is basically a good thing. That's why I welcome the fact that China is developing patents, is advancing technology on solar, on wind, but it needs to be fair competition. And just a last quick word on fair transition. I have a suggestion. Go look at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. There is a set of 17 goals that define what fair transition should be for everyone, because they have been agreed by everyone.
And that, I'm afraid, must be the last word. My apologies if we didn't get you in, but our time is up, and we must leave things there. In a moment, it's time for some more refreshments and some networking. And I hope you take time to continue this conversation, ladies and gentlemen, and indeed, of course, the fight against climate change outside these four walls. Thank you all for coming, especially my sincere thanks to all of our panelists, Dr. Chiara Antonelli, Jiangwen Guo, Nick Mabey, and Carl Falkenberg. Would you give them a round of applause, please? And from me, Jamie Owen, and all the team here, thank you and goodbye.